Ladies and gentlemen, here we are. This is the final session, and we've got a great lineup. And as I say, this is the wrap up of everything. So we'd like to thank everybody that's been on before. Great job, great comments, great feedback, and we've got some great reference points for when we all meet up next year. Now, today's last session, the people I'm talking about as being great, so I'm really building them up because I'm sure this is going to be a fantastic session. So firstly, I've got Thelma Etim, who's the editor at aircargoeye. Thelma, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure. And then we've got Alex Lennane or Lennane. I'm so sorry, Alex, if that's wrong, but hopefully I've got one of them right. Who's publisher of the Loadstar. And then we've got Will Waters, who's the editor and journalist of the CAAS magazine and Lloyds loading list. And on top of that, we've got Stan, who's been my fellow moderator and chairman, Stan Raith, who's the president and CEO of Sassy World. So guys, thank you all so much. And what I'd like to say before we kick anything off is myself and Stan, we were talking at the beginning and we wanted to do a wrap up with some well-known journalists and professionals and experts. We've got the utmost respect for what you've done, especially throughout the pandemic. And it's great reading and being kept up to date by real professionals. So we're really, really privileged to have you on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you from me too.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Cool. I was expecting wolf whistles and claps and everything. Anyhow, right, moving on. Now, all of the people that we've had, they've given us lots of feedback. There's been lots of common grounds, and you can imagine, you know, digitization and a word collaboration has come up so many times, and who should do what moving forward. But rather than go through everything and bullet points, what I'd like to do to start with is, you guys have been reporting now through an incredible time. You know, people in the next generation and beyond will look back and they'll say, my God, you know, what on earth happened there? And look how we got through it. But they'll be reading what you guys have written. So with that in mind, and if you look back, what do you honestly think have been the most positives that, you know, that you've really, really enjoyed writing about and communicating? What would you say have been the standout benefits of what's happened through this crisis? So who'd like to start there?
Happy to. I think for me, one of the biggest standouts has been the whole Preighters program. That's, you know, getting the airlines moving so quickly into getting those passenger aircraft operating in as cargo only format, and the speed that some of them got that up and running and set up the new networks. And it was hugely impressive, and how they then adapted around that. So that was I guess the biggest standout for me out of the whole thing.
Okay, thanks very much, Will. And Thelma, Alex, anything specifically from you?
I would definitely say vaccine rollout. I think that's very, very impressive. Exactly how all the actors have been able to work together. And it just shows what is possible. For example, American Airlines, they haven't had any cargo operations since 1984, actually switching to cargo and actually having a completely different focus. So it can be done. Instead of the arguments and discussions of why it is not possible, similar to digitalization, it can be done when it's necessary. All actors can come together.
Yep, no, lovely. That's it. Yep, take that one. And Alex?
I think the biggest benefits have been the opportunities provided by the fact that cargo is now in the public eye, whether it was the Ever Given ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal or the driver shortage, vaccine rollout, as Thelma says. These have put cargo right at the forefront, not just in the public eye, but also in the airlines' eyes, the passenger side. And I think that's been crucial, and that will be crucial going forward as well.
Yeah.
Chris, I'd like to add something there that Will said. Don't forget something. Those preighters are not easy to unload and offload. And the ground handlers and all the support people at the airports who picked up on that. Flying the airplane's easy. It's still the same two guys. But unloading and offloading those airplanes the way they did with the massive input, that's really something special.
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to add to that was that what the cargo handlers have been doing, not just in with regard to the offloading the preighters and developing new systems to do that more efficiently, but the collaboration and the pooling among cargo handlers is a rather impressive thing to me, and a surprising thing to have come out of this. And you know, I'm probably not aware of all of the initiatives to cooperate, collaborate, and pool resources among the cargo handlers. But certainly, as I understand it, been quite a lot of cases where you've got, you know, one cargo handler not having a lot of capacity, warehouse or staff resources, and the community coming together and enabling some sharing of those resources to manage the volumes there. And that's something that I don't think was often done previously, and yet it's been possible to do that quite quickly. And so it's going to be interesting to see how much of that we can hold on to in terms of that, well, not just that aspect of collaboration, but that kind of model of collaboration and pooling of resources. It seems that things have become possible in this crisis that didn't seem to be possible beforehand. And I'm interested to know how we can build on that, and whether we can sustain those models and that kind of attitude of collaboration there. I guess people find reasons sometimes to not collaborate, don't they? They sort of fall back on what the priorities are of their own businesses and what they are allowed and not allowed to do. Sometimes there's antitrust issues there around collaboration, but something has enabled this to happen in these circumstances. And I think it would be really valuable to find ways of progressing that and building on that.
100%, Will. And I think what happened and what everybody's experienced is it was community survival. So when you're all in the same rowing boat trying to survive, everybody will row and row and row and row, and you'll be surprised how quickly you move forward together. But this level of fear and threat and must do, you know, that's going to gradually start to wane away. But you know, like the lady said about the you know, the impacts and the collaboration, you know, all the things that have happened, it's made people change and really take note of what air cargo and supply chain is all about, which is a wonderful thing. Now, what we've got to do is get everybody to actually live that collaboration through many areas. Now, Stan, I'm sure you've got something to add to there, but before you do, there are certain things that have come up as being really effective. But by them coming up, what it's actually done is it's triggered some of the things that we've now really got to focus on moving forward. And many of the things interlink. And I know, Thelma, when we were chatting beforehand, you know, you were saying that, you know, mindset and interconnectivity of what people need to do. Do you want to just bring us aware of what your thoughts are there?
Well, I was thinking about something that Peter Punzel, if that's the correct pronunciation, said, and he essentially defended the way his company operates in terms of securing its own capacity.
Yeah.
And his argument is inflexibility, in that he needs to be able, his company that he works for needs to be able to focus on the customer and make sure they are able to service their customers. And so if they need to secure capacity, their own aircraft, then they will do so. So essentially, how does the air cargo industry react to that? How do players react to that? He's defended himself. What are your thoughts on it, Chris?
Yeah, my thoughts are that our industry has gone along and it develops. And over the years, we've done many things. So we had the console, we had the BUP, slack pallets. We've done so much to concede how to keep the business flowing in the right direction that we've opened up so many opportunities for disruptors to come into the business or to change the business. We've got the integrators now, we've got e-commerce. If we don't act quicker and start to realize what the next few stages are or the next few steps are, we're going to be left behind many times. And we've got a wonderful opportunity now because of what's happened through this pandemic to bring everybody together. And my feelings are that the two biggest influencers now moving forward are the airport and the GHA. And if they come together and they start to realize that by having a separate ecosystem in whatever airport and identifying what your marketing approach is or what your purpose is, that you can attract much, much more business, not just from the carrier's perspective, but forwarder, whatever type of transportation over land, but also associated business. So if you're cargo centric as an airport and you've been thinking that way, some would say it's a bit of luck, you know, that the crisis has blown in their direction, but keep going now, because this is an incredible opportunity now to do something different. And if we don't do something different, somebody else will come in and they'll do it. And what Peter was talking about there, you know, getting their own capacity, looking after their own handling companies, where those airports go, the schedules, they're all things that people are learning, and they're learning quickly. And you look at some of the names that we haven't seen on local shores and what they're doing now with e-commerce, it's phenomenal. So we've got to be much quicker, work together. The difference is we've got different segments or different modules within our supply chain. We've got to make them all work effectively and work together, and realize that it's a relay team now and not just everybody trying to sprint or do a marathon. So, you know, I think there's nothing but opportunities, provided people get together quicker, make things simpler. There's only two types of products, value and volume. If you're in the value business, make sure you're giving the value, you're giving the services, which are not happening at the moment. And that's because of lots of the pressures. But if that doesn't start to change, then, you know, people are going to start looking at their own alternatives again. So, you know, very, 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 very challenging, but great opportunities moving forward, in my opinion. So thank you for asking me that, Thelma. You're the first one who threw it back on me, so I really appreciate that. So well done. So now over to you, Alex.
I was just going to say about disruptors when you said that, and I think the air cargo industry has a tendency to look at disruptors in air cargo, but there's many more disruptors out there.
Yeah.
And I think that they're going to find that the disruption comes from other modes as much as from within the air cargo industry. And I think that your idea of, you know, the handlers and the airports being pivotal is important, but I think that the industry also needs to look very much outside itself. If you look at the shipping lines are on course to make $100 billion in profit this year. It's a big amount of money, and they're going to be spending it. And I mean, this morning in my inbox, Costco, Chinese shipping line, said it was investing in cold chain solutions to give it, I think, a broader range of perishables that it can carry. And this is one of the places they're going to be putting their money into. And I think the airlines, if they're not careful, they're going to find their business is entirely restricted to time-sensitive shipments only. So it'll be e-commerce and supply chain disruption. And if they don't build these factors in when they're looking to build their business back, they will have missed a great big point, which is, and then there's also trains as well, which are adding more and more capacity, increasingly popular. And I think the disruption can come from all sorts of places.
Yeah, no, I agree. And interestingly enough, Alex, I was also reading an article where they were talking about that investment won't necessarily go in storage facilities, but will go in special like packaging and insulation and all things that are necessary to make sure that it's able to last its journey rather than have to be topped up or stored in expensive facilities, which exactly. To a degree, I mean, we've spent a lot of time and money doing.
It's direct competition, I'd say.
Yep.
Can I interject here a little bit?
Yeah.
Hi, Chris. Look, guys, I haven't said anything on 2 points, but I've got a definite opinion on it. One, disruption and historical issues. The pharmaceutical industry, air cargo took a big rap on, right, at the beginning. And everyone talked about a modal shift to sea freight because basically we'll take the 30 days of transit time, but because of the fact that the container keeps my goods where I want it to be and it's monitored while it's on the ship, I'd rather not lose a shipment than give it to air freight where it's going to be ruined. I wonder, and I think research proves me right, that if the airlines had been talking to the pharmaceutical companies, they would have realized what was coming. And instead of relying on a freight forwarder who's keeping the information to himself because he wants a competitive edge when he's handling that shipment. And I spoke to one of the largest Indian exporters about this, and he agreed with me. So disruptors have to have information. And the only way that you're going to get information is we have transparency, and we don't have that in this business because we all operate in silos. And we're the only business that does that. All right, that's number one. The sea freight industry, you see more and more, and Maersk is a perfect example. And there was an article, excuse me, recently in the press about that very fact, the fact that the air freight industry is going to fall behind the sea freight companies and what they're doing. They have massive money now. Alex just brought it up, right. But let me tell you something, so do the all cargo freighter operators have massive amounts of money right now. And that's no joke. But are they investing it in logistics, or are they putting it back to the bondholders and shareholders and private equity companies? No. So we got to look at ourselves a little bit more critical way of looking at things. That's number one. Number two, transparency is going to bring about disruption. If you know what's going on, you can come up with a solution. And that's a private industry. Private industry has solutions. And collaboration, I use the analogy, you know what a camel is, okay? It's a horse designed by a committee. And each airport is different. Each airline is different. Each aircraft type is different. You should know what you're doing, and you can add value in the supply chain. I really feel the only reason these major forwarders are chartering their own controlled capacity is because we failed to give them what they needed to keep their shippers, the beneficial cargo owners, happy, and the importers. If we had done something correct, they wouldn't have had to go out. Remember something, they're chartering aircraft. The owners of those aircraft, the airlines that had those aircraft, if they had a proper product, we would have had less problems than we do now. So what have the large forwarders done? They've just turned themselves into integrators because we as airports and GHAs and airlines failed them. Yeah. And lesson learned, I hope.
Yep, true enough. Will, you were talking about the word collaboration, which I know is a word that you like. I probably, if we were in the showers together, I might even find it tattooed somewhere on you. So I'm sure you want to expand on that.
I don't want to comment on that one.
But as far as collaboration is concerned, and also the fact that you were interested in the representative bodies session that we had, so IATA and co. Now, is there anything that you feel needs to be improved on what your understanding and interpretation of that collaboration and the regulatory or the representative bodies? What more could they do?
Yeah, well, I'll link there to that session where a friend, Glyn Hughes, now Tiaka, talked about the whole collaboration model or the whole joined up model, which and Glyn reminded us all that we've had a great example of an end-to-end product with great visibility for a long time now, and that's from the integrators. And he's asked the question of why air freight has still not managed to find a virtually integrated model to rival or match that of the integrators, given that we can see that it works when it is fully integrated and somebody joins up all the dots in the supply chain. Now, I mean, yeah, we've been asking that question for a long time, and Stan is one of those who's been asking that question for a long time and been working with companies in order to try and create virtual integration or virtual integrators. Now the question was asked of Brendan Sullivan from IATA, why have we now got all the pieces with better technology now and greater availability of data and platforms for data sharing? Have we now got enough within the general air cargo chain to join all the pieces up? And one of the points Brendan made was that well we may we are dealing with disparate organizations and this is where the difficulty is, and each of those does have their own priorities. They've got their own business models, they've got their own cultures, and as Stan mentioned, they've also got different kinds of capacity as well. Maybe the capacity disparities aren't so important. You can overcome them with good communication about what capacity is available, but then so perhaps you're left with then the cultures, the businesses being different, lots of different businesses with different cultures, and how to then motivate those organizations to collaborate in a way that makes sense. There's also comparisons, I suppose, with associations collaborating, and this is one of has been a frustration, I think, probably among some journalists and maybe others in the industry over the years, is how you've got these associations that are involved in air freight, but they tend to have in the past, historically, they've worked quite separately. You've got TIACA and you've got IATA and FIATA and then other related organisations, the Airport Services Association, and not much joining up in terms. There's been efforts recently too, but again, like the individual companies in the supply chain, they've got their own agendas, they've got their own financing models, they've got their own reasons to motivate them, and I think there's been some improvements there, and we've seen that accelerate during the crisis, and some of the people within the sessions here have talked about that progress that's been made within this, among the associations, more joining up, more working together in order to get things done, and these associations sitting together on some of the committees with organizations like ICAO and the World Customs Organization. And there, I think we have seen some progress, and it was, I think the Airport Services Association said they now have a cargo dedicated organization within their structure now as well, and so some progress there, cargo raising its head on the agenda. I think one of the very interesting points I thought was made by the gentleman from ICAO was that that there really is an opportunity now with cargo being such a high profile within the airline organizations, and we've said this before in the past, but really it is at the top of the agenda now. ICAO has been pretty dominated by its passenger before now, up till now, and air cargo has kind of been a victim of its own success, and that it gets on and sorts things out despite the problems, despite the lack of connectedness. It kind of makes do, and the cargo does eventually get there, albeit not in the most efficient and clear way. But the gentleman from ICAO was urging everyone, all stakeholders in this, to keep pushing now that the doors are open within a lot of organizations, to make cargo's voice heard on the various committees, various organizations within the United Nations agencies, for example, the WCO, the World Economic Forum, and there was a kind of positive comment right at the end of his presentations where he was saying that fruit is being born, and meaning that cargo's voice now really does have is being heard. And if we push at the open door now at an organizational level, at the association level, and if those associations work together with a single voice, they have more power. And so I think I see quite a lot of positivity from that. And if air freight can continue to build on that in some ironic way, air freight kind of needs the crisis to carry on another year until the next triennial ICAO big meeting next October, so the cargo's still up on the agenda.
Just one thing, it's ongoing now. It's not waiting for that. Okay, there's a lot of work being done now to prepare for it. That's only the icing on the cake. Okay, there's a lot of great things, and the state is ICAO. Remember that these are the governments, and they tend to dictate things. And governments, if they dictate, for example, data corridors, trade corridors, if they dictate safety and security issues which are positive, it's much better than a silo like one of the organizations. It's much better if it comes down and that forces people. So one of the things we've put, because I'm on a few of those committees, one of the things we've said is that if ICAO has this committee, it should start with a mission statement, and they all agree to that. Terms of reference of each organization to fulfill that mission statement. So IATA is airlines. It's nothing more than airlines. Whatever it does outside of airlines, it's a business to try to make money. But their job is to represent airlines. TIACA will have a role. WCO will have a role. If they know their terms of reference from that mission statement, we can possibly get somewhere. That's why I'm very encouraged with what Courtney had to say.
I think it's encouraging.
Well, what I'd like to say there is that I think the fact that everybody now is really focusing on cargo is fantastic. And a saying that I heard during the week: a rising tide raises all ships. But once they're all raised, they need to go in a certain direction, and there needs to be some sort of sense about what they're doing.
Somebody's phone is going off, Chris.
Somebody's what, sir?
Somebody's phone is going off, and you can hear it through the microphones.
Fantastic. At least it shows that we're live and that there's business out there. So thank you for that, Stan. Really appreciate it.
I didn't know it was yours. I'm sorry.
No. So back to the rising tide, raising all ships. What we do with this now impetus is so important. And lots of people I've been talking to, they're saying it's lovely to hear that all these representative bodies are now creating cargo focus, but to have so many people doing the same thing, it would be better to consolidate them and have greater focus. Now, one of the things that you said earlier, Thelma, was about, is cargo being marketed correctly? You know, and how do we get certain messages that make sense to everybody who's now got an interest in cargo?
Well, I think obviously cargo's profile has been raised due to the pandemic. However, there is still an awful lot of work to be done. And I think in relation to transparency, we do have to address accountability.
Yep.
Because where we have data blind spots, ULDs going missing, trucks queued for 2 or 3 hours in some cases, that all has to be addressed in relation to transparency. And there are, I wouldn't necessarily say bad actors, but there are actors within the air cargo industry who don't want to address transparency for those reasons, because they will be held accountable.
Yep, no, very valid.
Explain where the cargo is, why it isn't where it should be at the time.
Yeah. And I think something, I'm not sure, we were on an earlier session, Stan, weren't we? I think with Olivier, and we were talking about how many times people now check their iPhones or whatever when they're tracking. 26 times or 25 times or something.
Yeah, Canada Post told me that the minimum that they get is 21 times somebody's checking for their B2C shipment coming in if there's a tracking number. Minimum 21. Yeah. It's been as high as 67 times in peaks. But going back to what you said before about trucks lining up and everything else, the transparency about that is apparent to people at that airport, but it's not apparent to the shipper. And once it does become transparent to the shipper that at that particular airport or in that particular GHA, these things are going wrong.
Yep.
You know, it shocks me sometimes when you talk to an airline or a GHA and say that if you don't put in digitization to allow these trucks to have a booking in a slot, so Alex, a subject you and I often talk about, if trucks don't have to queue, if it's too hot in the summertime, to keep the engine running, to keep the air conditioning going. If it's too cold in the wintertime, to keep the engine going, to keep the heating going. The driver has to go somewhere, right? So if we had transparency in all of this, like even a simple thing like a truck slot monitoring system, what's going to happen is the cargo is going to move in and out faster. The importer is going to be happy. If the importer's happy, he will tell the exporter, hey, use that airline again with that GHA because it works. If I go to the other guy, he doesn't have these systems. It doesn't work because my trucks, my shipments are being delayed, and my truck driver was only allowed to be on the road for 10 hours legally. He's spending 5 of them lining up here to get my shipments. So, you know, transparency would do a lot to up people's game.
Yeah, 100%. And Thelma, with what Stan has just said, and back to the marketing point, you know, do you think one of the things that we should be doing as well is try and make things a lot simpler? Because we seem to have a way of even the simple things, we want complexity involved. You know, there's so many processes and so many ifs and ands and buts, and people want to do things their own way. And from SLAs to KPIs, there seems to be very little consistency and transparency. So, you know, do you think that these regulatory bodies that Will was talking about and representative bodies, don't you think that they should spend a little bit more time now trying to simplify and then market that simplification as the best way forward?
To an extent, I think that essentially it still requires different supply chain businesses to communicate with each other. So we're still returning to the whole aspect of digitalization and the fact that a GHA hasn't received the information about a freighter arriving the day before, at least, the freighter actually arrives. I'm not sure that an association can actually assist in that when a communication is needed and correct information flows are needed.
Yep. No, there's an awful lot that that one would, if you were, I'm just trying to think now, for people that are sitting in doing their A levels or getting ready to go to university or even in university, if they want to come into logistics, or now they're looking at air cargo or whatever, their expectations and understanding, I think, will be shot down, because they'd be so surprised at some of the things that don't happen that they would almost be taken for granted. And the dissatisfaction from the consumer's perspective now, and with all these other pressures about people leaving the industry, what type of succession do we have, the capabilities, the pressures, etc., it's going to make it even worse. So, Alex, if I could ask you now, with regards to this sort of silo mentality and sort of self-survival, and not often looking out the windows or even the door at what's happening in other industries and how that can affect us, how do you think that's going to move forward now, or how should it move forward?
Well, I think logistics as a whole has had a massive change, obviously, in the last 18 months. And I think there's a few things that airlines in particular should be aware of that maybe they're not. One of the things is the shipping lines. I mean, everyone moans about how bad everything's been in Chicago in terms of air freight. It doesn't even touch the sides of the problems in the shipping line industry. Imagine that in every port around the world. And the shippers are incredibly angry in a way that I've never seen before. I mean, they're furious. They are paying sort of 10, 11 times the normal freight rates that they were 2 years ago. Surcharges have gone through the roof.
Yep.
They're paying, the on-time performance is as little as 12% on some trade lanes for shipping lines. And then they're paying detention and demurrage charges. So they're paying to store freight that they can't even access. They're furious, and they're going to regulators about this. And I think this is going to be quite crucial for the airlines, is that as the Federal Maritime Commission in the US, the law courts, Europe, China, other authorities in the US, they're all now looking at carriers and how they can limit their profit-making ability, how they can limit surcharges. And I think you'll see the balance of power shift away from shift away from carriers and become more in the hands of the consumers. And I think things like surcharges, which can be unexplained and frankly inexplicable, need to be looked at very carefully. And I think air cargo needs to be very careful and learn some of these lessons, because the regulators may well turn their eyes on the airlines as well, because the shipping lines have frankly ballsed it up really badly.
They will turn on the airlines, because it's the same scenario. I mean, exactly. I can tell you some major providers of capacity charging for a charter. Before, it used to be all-in price per hour was roughly between $12,000 and $14,000 for a 747. It's now double that. It's $25,000 an hour. Now that's gouging. Okay, when you talk about governments, so I was shocked when we spoke to the Canadian government recently of what they paid for airlift when people were dying, and we needed PPE, and we need forget the vaccines. I got to say something on the vaccines. UPS and FedEx picked up the ball for the most part, and they did it seamlessly with digitization. None of this storing in warehouses. It came off the airplane and went to the hospitals, and we're still talking about putting things through a warehouse. But the PPE, the gouging that went on during that time is astronomical. And don't think governments don't see it. They do. I mean, the Hungarian government went out and bought a freighter and put it at the disposal of one of their carriers, because they don't want to be caught like that again. The Civil Reserve Air Force in the US traditionally always overpaid for everything, but at least they were able to call it up. But what about the rest of the countries? You don't think that countries didn't and don't understand now that they're being gouged? They will, and the lesson isn't learned, because what the carrier will tell you is, all that time they were paying me below price, now I'm getting them back, but they're not getting let's call it the distribution channel, to be polite. back because they're making massive profits as well. When you look at all these acquisitions that are going on, it's not all debt financing. So yeah, there are some lessons to be learned, and if you poke the lion a bit too much, it can bite back, and it will. Transparency is there on that respect, at least, Alex, I can assure you, in air freight.
Yeah, no, valid point there, Stan. And also I think there'll be a lot of reflection, and who knows how they'll respond afterwards, looking back with a bit of hindsight as to what people did and what were the motivations, and then what can be done about it. So, you know, a little bit of kickback, I think, is sure. Will, been a bit quiet for a little while, my friend. What would you like to say?
Well, one of the things I think is interesting from all of this, there's been a lot of money being made by the pure cargo, some of the pure cargo operators here, and the freight forwarders have done pretty well out of the last 18 months, really. But I still feel, you know, cargo handlers are not necessarily benefiting from this. They'll be having to, you know, work harder for I don't think any more money, probably in some cases less money, under pressure from the airlines, who are, of course, you know, the passenger airlines with passenger businesses are struggling like anything in terms of their finances. I feel like the cargo handlers are, you know, are under ever more pressure out of this, and are being stretched ever more thinly as a result of this. And no matter what goes on, there never seems to be any more money for them. And this is where quality happens in air freight on the whole. It's on the ground at the cargo handlers, and yet they're not being really invested in, and because they don't have stability of pricing. It's a race to the bottom on pricing, and so there, I think, is a sort of, you know, a continuing challenge that has yet to be resolved. And there've been some initiatives among cargo handlers, but and some digitalization is making things a bit more efficient among cargo handlers. So I guess that's where I see a positive area, I suppose, is in some of these areas of digitalization, where the airport cargo communities have been making progress with some of their data sharing initiatives, starting off with some of those initiatives you've discussed just now and were talked about here, in the sort of truck booking slots initiatives, and it's gone on from there to some extent for the cargo handlers, and they're beginning to be able to integrate some of that greater visibility and some of that better data, earlier data, into their cargo handling processes. So I think there's some that's the sort of one positive I think comes out of it from me in digitalization, is seeing some benefits to cargo handlers, but because they're not seeing it from higher rates, from what I can see.
Yeah, I think the GHA is also, you mentioned about digitization and improvements and efficiencies, and that's what they've always had to contend with. But I think now is the best time ever for them to start pitching for their case, but to prove what it is that they can actually, what it is they can actually provide. And some of them, they've got to be big enough and brave enough to start saying no for some of the things that they're being requested or forced to do, because those that start to offer a value proposition, then they'll do well out of this. But those that don't, they'll, as you said, they'll keep sinking to the bottom.
Yeah, but Chris, Alex, you know, one of the things you're very keen on, and I've seen it always, and you speak up about it, is environmental impact, right? The environmental impact of a GHA, and for example, truck marshaling, truck queuing.
Yep.
I mean, one of the airports in the US got on CNN because the truck drivers were getting into fistfights on the highway in queues, right? There's so much pollution going on, which an environmental impact that could be helped if we digitized all this. I mean, why dispatch a truck for your truck driver to sit on the ground for 4 hours in a queue, or 5 hours or 6 hours in a queue? And it happens, Thelma. I'm talking much worse than 3 hours. When you can just dispatch them to another job and then tell them, just go to the airport at 2:15 because we have a slot for you there, and that's what you should expect to do, right? So the environmental impact, why when I mean, I understand things like biofuel, it's important, right? And I have my view on it. You probably have yours. If we get it out of algae, I have no problem. But if we're going to start using corn to do it, I have a problem. But you know, why aren't we pushing as media things that seem to me like low-hanging fruit? Like I said, digitization can do a tremendous amount for. It can do a lot for the environment. It can do a lot for the quality of jobs of people at the airport. It can do a lot for the airport itself, and the environmental impact. You know, it's a quick fix. Why aren't we pushing digitization in the media? But not, please, booking platforms are not digitization. That's just putting another layer between the shipper and the airline. So you have, instead of a forwarder relationship, GSA, I mean, if we put more layers between on the booking side of it, it's a different story. I'm talking about sustainability economically. You can save costs, improve jobs, make people stick around and start appreciating this kind of work as a job, and we can help the environment. Why aren't we forcing, through your media power, which you have, people to start talking about this? Alex?
I think that cargo community systems and technology, digitization are really useful for cutting emissions. And it should absolutely be part of our focus. I also think that to some extent, this misses the elephant in the room. Now, if you look at what the forwarders are doing at the moment, even the medium forwarders, the small forwarders, as when you book your cargo, whether it's shipping or air, you can see the emissions. You can see door to door, you can see airport to airport, you can choose whatever you want to see. On the ground bit, that's the same as in rail freight, and it's the same as in sea freight. So your emissions there, great, cut them, but competitively, you're not making any difference. The big bit is the airport to airport, and that's where aviation, I think, is way behind where it should be. And while I completely agree with you, Stan, I think aviation is really missing a trick by not making its goals much better than they should be. I think one of the reasons for this is that long-haul passenger airlines don't have modal competition. The only competition they've got is each other. So it's very easy for one of them to say, oh, we'll just do a bit of offsetting, that will do it. Whereas the shipping lines, with all this money, they're going to be investing heavily in the environment, and the shippers are going to be able to see that and say, why? If I get my planning right, I'll send it on a ship rather than air freight. The forwarders are saying to me, we were now looking at the shippers have been shocked by the carbon costs of air freight. And so that the main part of the conversation is, how do we cut that? How do we cut that by cutting air cargo? And I think the cargo airlines need to start leading, instead of allowing the passenger airlines and IATA, and I put IATA as a big point in this, they've just been listening to passengers for too long. The cargo people who do have modal competition really need to get together and look at how they're going to create better targets and net zero. I mean, Shell said last week that the targets that IATA has set are nowhere near good enough and could easily be better. They say that we can do net zero by 2050. But until the cargo airlines, or the cargo sides of the airlines, start to do something about this, it's not going to go far enough, fast enough. And the airlines are saying we want incentives, we want carrots. I would say the stick is going to be the biggest thing here, which is they're going to lose a lot of business if they don't start to manage their emissions better.
But Alex, there's one thing I got to say here. Again, I go back to the fact that it seems to me that the airlines are struggling for every penny. On the passage side, before this crisis started, we were seeing fares that are unbelievably low. I mean, $750 to fly from the US to China and back. You can't sustain an airline. You can't reinvest, right? But on the environmental side, what ICAO did, because the states got together on emissions, the 777-200 freighter and the 767 freighter can no longer be produced as of 2027 because the engines that you need to meet those emission standards can't be fit on the wings. So new technology had to come into it. But technology can only go so far. And quite honestly, a jet engine can run on hydrogen, right? It can. I mean, they put jet engines on pipelines to move the gas through, and it runs off the gas in the pipeline to keep it going. They put it up in the Arctic, they turn it on, and they come back a year later to see if everything's fine, unless they get a red alert. So it can be done, but it's going to take government to do it, not IATA. It's going to take the people who are talking to their governments, like the Green Movement, to make the governments support ICAO in these movements. Technology, we built a 747 in 2 years. They designed it and put it up in the air. And then what happened? All of a sudden, these aviation companies started being driven by earnings per share and what the Wall Street people would do rather than engineering. So I push that back away from IATA. I don't think IATA is the way to go. I think it's pushing it through governmental things.
I think that's true. I think it's a stakeholder issue. I don't think it's just the airlines. It's just the airlines are going to suffer the most by not sorting it out. So they should be leading. And the other thing is they're going to find it harder to get financing. The banks are going to start to look at emissions as well. I mean, I had and again, from a shipping line this morning, they've got a transition linked agreement with the banks. So the banks will lend the money based on how their transition's going. I don't see any of this happening with the airlines. Maybe I've missed it, but I don't see the airlines looking at all the angles and how much they stand to lose by not making actions. And you look at someone like Air France KLM, which I think is the leader in this field. They're working with forwarders, they're working with shippers to try and get biofuels together. I don't see why every other airline's letting them lead like this. Why are they allowing Air France KLM to be the best? I mean, all I hear from the airlines is, oh, we've bought a new plane and that's cut emissions by so much. What Air France KLM is doing should be the absolute base level, and the others should be doing better than that. So I agree with you, Stan.
Who's the major shareholder in Air France KLM? The government. Okay.
And I agree, governments are crucial to this, but I think the airlines, it's their business. They need to lead. Precisely.
The government is influencing them. They banned Air France from flying anything less than 2 hours, et cetera, et cetera. If you go on the other side of the who owns it? The shareholders. And when they plow all the money back into the shareholders, which is what private enterprise is all about and the free market's all about, there's not much money left over for what they consider right now, because they only see the end of their nose, is return on investment. And that's why we don't see anything. That's why I hold out zero hope of the airlines associations solving this problem. It's got to be a government driven thing. The world is in crisis. Environment has to be fixed. I mean, I'll be on my second career as fertilizer, as I tell everybody when all these problems come, but I would hate like hell to see your children suffer as a consequence of our stupidity. And right now, I can't see self-regulation working when you have an association that's driven by profits, not by caring about what happens tomorrow.
And you've also got a business model that is led around being the last resort, essentially. In most cases, air freight is not planned in
not for
majority of cases.
Not for e-commerce. I mean, it's a necessity if you're going to meet the consumer demand.
Yeah, that's okay. That's 20% of the business, but for most air freight, it's not planned, is it? So yeah, I'm just throwing that in as another factor in the kind of the lack of motivation among airlines or air freight to address that aspect too of their priorities.
But throw one other thing into global warming, Alex, the droughts. We've been doing some studies in the southwest of the US for an airport, and we started looking at things like sea for fruits, vegetables, and everything else coming in by sea from South America to feed local population, but at the same time providing this by air from that airport to go over to Asia and other places that are severely affected by these droughts. We cannot ignore what the environment is doing to the populations, and how's that going to affect air freight? If we have to start piping water into the west coast of the United States and flying food into the west coast of the United States, which used to be the breadbasket of North America, the whole world's going to change. And when it comes to logistics, because it's just a fundamental problem that we're going to face. So yeah, you're right, but I really don't think that the airlines are good enough or smart enough or motivated enough to solve this. My personal opinion is we've got to push as media, as industry people, we've got to push the governments to get involved.
I'm surprised the integrators aren't on it a bit more as well.
Yeah, but they have the money to do it.
Yeah,
I think, Will, that's a bit unfair. I think they've actually done a lot more than the airlines.
Oh, no, it's not unfair. The integrators are doing a good job. I didn't say that they're not. They are, because like I said, they have the resources and they're able to invest in it.
lovely. Right, guys, let's just now go on to another little challenge, and also something that questions the return on investment. And Thelma, this again was something that we were talking about. You're looking at inflationary problems now and also doing the right thing, but people want to see a return on investment for training and for, you know, succession and retention of good employees, because that's something that's challenging all industries at the moment. Now, we were talking about that. Now, what do you think? Because on a personal note, I don't think it's right that everybody should say, right, we don't pay our people enough, so we should pay them more. I think we should be encouraging people to have a better self-asset value because they're capable of more, and we've got more flexibility for what can happen with the people. So then they deserve more money because they've got multiple opportunities and they can fit in with the peaks and troughs and times, etc. So I think you can get an effective return on investment if you train people in a certain way, and it's got to be different from the way we train them now, and it's got to be competency based and on a more blended perspective. But we should start thinking about how we remunerate people so that they feel that at whatever level they come into this industry, it's a career. And I also think we should be looking at more creative ways of mixing the physical employee with the more administrative employee so that they can do a little bit of both and they start to appreciate the whole process more and get a better feeling of self-value and where they belong. Have you got any points on that?
Well, I think you have to look at job prospects. What is the prospect? What are the job prospects for someone who wants to go into ground handling? How attractive is it? How far can they go? Is there a ceiling?
Yep. Well, I've got lots of examples of people and people who used to work for me as well. And I can remember a few of them saying, no, I could never get to that level. And they did, and they've done very well. And I think, you know, if you've got a good mentor and a good coach, and you've got like a DNA and a culture in an organization where they get satisfaction out of seeing good people go further than they ever thought they could, and you give them a lot of support and you've got a coaching or a mentor mentality, those people will never forget that. And we've got some great people who started on the very, very basics at the floor, and somebody said to them, you've got an opportunity, you will. And they were inspired by that, and they managed to do great things. So I think there's an opportunity in the issue. Again, coming back to one of the things you said earlier, we don't market it well enough, and we don't have a nice transparent grid of what you can do. And we also sometimes turn off on people too early. And I think people have got different times in their career when they want to do different things, and it shouldn't be age, it shouldn't be there should be no hold back from anybody doing anything at any time in our industry, but we have to make it clear what they can do. But we have to make everybody who comes into it understand that the more you're able to do yourself and the more value you become, the greater the opportunity.
I think in terms of raising the profile regarding recruitment, what is happening in relation to the veterans? Are some of them are becoming consultants? Are they going into schools? Are they going into universities? Are they raising the profile of the air cargo industry? And what sort of job, career a younger person can have along the supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because so many people I know in the industry, and I'm being 100% honest now, they've turned into very bitter people, okay? Because as soon as they either make a date that they're going to leave the organization or the industry, or somebody else makes that decision for them, that's it, they're gone. And then the people who are going to take their positions don't want to ask them any advice or whatever, and then they don't want to give it. And then there's this unnecessary waste of that time and precious information. Now, I agree with you. I think there should be a program, whether it's from IATA or whoever, that states that certain people who've got the capability to motivate, to engage, to coach, to be really positive with people coming into the industry, that's almost like a little farewell career that they could have within the industry to bring people on. But I also think it should be encouraged within companies that if you can break the barriers from somebody who knows they're going to get the position to somebody who had the position, so that they can come together, and the ones who are leaving can impart their commitment, their enthusiasm, their passion about certain elements of that job, and give that to the next generation, whether the next generation is younger, whatever they are, it doesn't matter. But if the new ones can also open their minds to realizing that there are some things in life that you cannot buy, and it only comes with time and experience. And why not get that earlier so that they can do so much more? So I think the whole ingredients of how to train people, how to motivate people, how to make people be so positive about their last company or the last stages of their career, rather than having that bitterness that so many people take with them. And, you know, you look at some of the comments on LinkedIn, and you look at some of the way people, they're negative. Why? All we want to do as human beings is do as best as we can with our lap of honor, but try and bring others on and help them do better than we ever did. And I know as youngsters, you know, we don't want to listen to our parents or grandparents or whatever, but sometimes, and very often in life, you sit there and you think, my God, I wish I'd have listened earlier. I wish I hadn't have done that. I just think there's a nice balance. Sorry, hold on a second, Stan, I'm on a bit of a roll here. I just think there's a nice balance of what we could do, should do, and must do, and also to instill some standards in people to say, look, get yourself as qualified as possible. And I don't mean qualified by the amount of certificates you have in a folder and having memory tests at the end of a training course. I'm talking about proper practical skills that you know make an impact on the business. And I would love to see people go into schools telling them what a great industry this is, but telling them why it's a great industry. I would love to see people offering themselves as mentors, a little bit like a dating agency. You know, what do you like about this particular person? And then they say their 3 most passionate areas of the business. And then anybody who's promoting somebody or who's got an interim position or whatever, say, right, I want that person to train our people up in those particular skills. I think there's a space for that. And I think loads of people would love to do it.
Yes, I would like to see mentoring schemes. I think that's extremely important. And there should be multiple schemes addressing each supply chain business, essentially.
Well, I'm a big supporter of that. So when you've got some mentor positions available, Thelma, just give me a shout. I'd love to do it.
Can I say something, Chris?
Yeah, where you go, Stan.
Thank you.
Here's a mentor of mentors.
Well, I just want to say some of the things that you're talking about do exist. They're just not maybe public knowledge. There is mentoring programs. We did just recently some work with the Toulouse Business School in their aviation division, which obviously Airbus is very much interested in, free of charge. We've offered 2 of us actually have done mentoring of students with the TBS. So that occurs. We've done, myself personally, I've done about 4 in the last 2 years, mostly from Germany, people doing their educational thesis on logistics, because it doesn't seem to be much of a career over here in North America, but it does seem to be a big thing in Europe. So it does exist. That's number 1. Number 2, learning from the bottom up. I started, believe it or not, as a summer job in KLM as a mailboy. Okay. I did pretty good out of KLM over the years because I worked, I studied, I got involved, and there was a career path. But that was at a time when KLM Cargo, you could not become president of KLM unless you'd become the cargo manager at one point. That stopped with Leo Van White. But after that, it didn't happen anymore. But in those days, cargo was taken seriously. Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, even all the other airlines had these programs of training academies, training schools. But in a cyclical business like we're in, what gets cut first?
Yeah.
So if you're going to, Chris, your video went off. I don't know if you know it or not. What you're looking at now is a situation of what gets cut in a crisis, and we've got to come back again. And what you just said, you should promote as media, because I can only draw one way of looking at it. Look at what Emirates became: Ram Menon, Pradeep, Hiran, Peter Sedgley. They basically were the core of Emirates Cargo in the very, very beginning, and they were there right up until the end of their careers. And Hiran's still there, God bless his heart. They're professionals because Emirates recognized cargo as a career, a core path. If I ask anything of IATA, because I have a lot of problems with IATA, you know that, I'm very vocal about it. But if I got one thing IATA could do, which would be super for the air logistics business, is to lobby and work and promote and enforce with the people that belong to that association that cargo is a core business, and treat it as such, not as a stepping stone to a quote unquote better career working in passage. So that
perhaps offer training programs as a program.
Precisely.
Yeah, for a career in air logistics. I guess quite a lot of the development work that does take place within air logistics happens within the freight forwarding companies, doesn't it? And you see there that they've got probably better developed apprenticeship programs and programs to bring on new people and career progression structures, and indeed educational links with universities or you know, in some countries, especially in Central Europe, you know, there's a lot of people will go through degree programs and higher education programs before coming into logistics. But yeah, better integration of that kind of ongoing career development, I suppose, could be a big part of it. And there are probably lessons that on the carrier and cargo handling side can learn from the freight forwarding side in terms of training and development in logistics, personnel development.
You know, the government of the Netherlands and Belgium, and I'm sure other countries like that, they treat logistics as a state asset.
Yeah. Mm. Yep, there's different ways. Yep. Right, guys, listen, before I ask you the three magic ingredients for the future, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity just to cover a particular subject matter that you think maybe hasn't been covered enough on this discussion, or that you'd like to bring to the fore before we do the closing sections. So first, foremost, who'd like to go first? Anybody?
I'd like to refer to something that Stan said earlier, and this is in relation to the platforms. Various businesses now have quite a few platforms regarding rates, obviously, cargo capacity, etc., of airline. And I think in relation to digitalization, I would like to go back to having one single standard system, because the issue is that you can have multiple systems, and so that's not unlike having multiple documentation. And so there has to be a situation for digitalization to go forward where it's streamlined and every actor within the supply chain business has the same set of standards, because a lot of the conversations and discussions throughout the whole conference have been about different actors, different airports having different standards in terms of quality. And for digitalization to work, you can't have that. You cannot have people on different systems. So I'm wondering how that will be possible.
Can I just interject something? I know it's part of your 3 points, but I can...
No, this is not the 3 points. This is just something
okay, sorry.
to each individual. So no
Thelma, I can assure you and guarantee you that that is being addressed at the highest level. And that goes back to what I said before. You need a mission statement. The data corridor concept and the data systems, FIAT is involved. Everybody's involved in coming up with a common platform for communication and at a state level. and the input is being taken from them. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel on that one. I believe.
Okay, good. Thank you, Thelma. Thanks, Dan. Alex?
I might just go back to a point that you recently made about training, which is slightly controversial perhaps. But if you get all the old white blokes to do the training, does anything ever happen? Does anything ever change? Don't you just have the same problem over and over again, a bit like conferences and everything else that we're dealing with? Maybe it's time to look outside the industry and get other people to.
Oh, Alex, I'm going to tell Lillian you said that.
That is beautiful, Alex. But I don't remember saying about the old white man doing that. So I got to sling that one back at you, my lovely. To be honest with you, I don't care who would do it. What I said was What I said was people that had a passion and were positive and wanted to impart not everything, but impart something. That goes without saying. They're only one member of a team, and in a team you have lots of different positions. So from academia, people should be in there. They should be people from different parts of industries that show a different approach to customer awareness and lots of different elements. But that's a big holistic thing. But the one thing that's missing, which we've got ready-made now, is there are some lovely people in this industry who, for some reason or another, either don't want to or don't get the opportunity to or don't think there's any need to pass on some of that information. And I don't give a monkey's hoot about colour, religion, whatever it is. Anybody that's good enough and is willing enough and wants to do something that's positive, that's a great thing. And that's the sort of people we need. But it's having the willingness to learn as well as the willingness to give. And that's like anything in life. But the best way of learning is that you see it from so many different sides and so many different perspectives. And that, please God, is one of the good things of what's happening now. But we have to be careful with any changes, whether it's in society or business, that you don't go from one extreme to the other. It's always nice to get nice refined changes near the middle. So whatever happens, there's not too much negative impact. And I think there's some lovely things happening now, and we should continue to change, but not also lose sight of some basic standards and principles. So thank you for that.
As an old white guy, I'm not saying anything anymore.
Yeah. Stan, hey, you've been victimized, mate. I think there's a case here, son.
Yeah,
Just think maybe
my SVP training in my company is a lady from Singapore, and I mean, what can I tell you, Alex?
I just think maybe the airlines in particular, or air cargo, also needs to hear different perspectives, which might help it change and build back better in a functional way.
Build back better and make it matter. And thank you so much, Alex, for bringing in the title of this particular conference. And that bring back better is so already overused, but make it matter. That's what we need. Make it matter.
Will.
Yeah, well, I think.
Don't be so controversial, Will.
No,
if you are, say, old white-haired white man, would you please?
I think they have a very valuable contribution to make. I think Alex and you would probably agree with Alex that it's also important to get different perspectives, and especially if we're trying to encourage young people and maybe people who are sort of involved more on the tech side of things, who can communicate more about how data can be used within this wider logistics and supply chain sector, and air freight kind of can be seen as more involved in that kind of wider interconnected world where there is a lot of kind of interesting and quite funky things going on with the disruptors and the digital data sharing people. But you probably all agree with that anyway. And on one little bugbear of mine, I hear a lot, I heard it in this conference, and I hear it a lot about the issue of digitalization. A lot of complaints that we still use paper and there's still paper accompanying shipments. And I always think, when I hear that, I think, maybe the problem isn't necessarily that the paper's accompanying them. It's just whether or not the digitalization happens. And I sometimes hear people talking about, the benefits of digitalization is we don't have to fly this paper around. And I know that is a slight issue, but I think it's about getting the data early and accurately, isn't it? Which I think is the most important. And I know certain experiments, is it Lufthansa Cargo that has a sort of single message or a program where they took away the opportunity to bring paper with your shipment, and actually that upped the rate of digitalization. But maybe there are other ways of motivating people to digitalize as well as just taking away the paper. And there's certain people that remain kind of wary about taking away the paper there. But anyway, I'm just sort of throwing that in as something.
Yeah, lots of people have got lots of reasons for trying to keep it, Will, but it's a big disaster that we can't get rid of it. It's such a shame that we can't do that.
I just want to interject one thing here, guys. In one of the ICAO conferences last week, not conference, but a closed web meeting we had, somebody from FedEx was on the call, and also somebody from the US Department of Homeland Security. And they said, FedEx said quite clearly, if we could digitize everything, we'd do it tomorrow. And if anybody can do it, the integrators can. And I think we have to agree to that because they control the whole chain door to door, right? They said the biggest hindrance to full digitization is that governments don't trust the information. Okay.
And what does that mean, Stan?
Well, that's what I was just going to say. That goes back to cybersecurity. All right. And cybersecurity now, that's where you guys can help so much. Cybersecurity, these cargo community systems, the one one of them that was put into an airport we work with, it has 7 degrees of encryption. And when we showed that we discussed that with Canadian Border Protection here in Canada about a couple of airports, they said, okay, we want 2 of those systems and we want it tomorrow, facetiously. But once they learned that, their eyes opened, okay? Now, CBP in the US is doing the same. They are now, because of single window, remember that now. Forget IATA one record, that's just for IATA. But globally, sea freight, rail freight, everything is going to single window based on UN Resolution 33 or UN Declaration 33. Now, how are we going to make these people who we have to give paper to now trust the data so that they won't ask for paper anymore? That's more important than worrying about how many e-airway bills did we transmit, because that's irrelevant. The first e-airway bill was transmitted in 1988 in Canada by a company that was a private enterprise at the time. It was bought by Bell Canada and they scrapped it because that's not interesting to do this. But the fact is that you have to get the government authorities, agriculture, everybody to trust that the data is legitimate. And when you have people now hacking into your pipelines for your oil and gas and into your food supply chain, I can understand why they wouldn't be happy with what's going on now. So we have to tackle this as an industry, and we have to support government initiatives to bring cybersecurity front and foremost, because then everybody will trust digital, and everybody will use it.
Yep, and also the rerouting and the change of status and all the disruptions that are going on. It's incredible. Thank you all for that. Now we come to the big finale. You can be as controversial as you like now, because there's 3 high impact issues that I'm going to ask you. What do you think should happen and that you would fully support and endorse within the next 9 months to make our industry a lot more effective? So anybody can start. And it's 3 nice basic points, because we're going to put these up on the success bulletin board, which hopefully will be a little feature in Rome next year at next year's conference. So who'd like to go first? Thelma, lovely.
Go first. I think, first of all, one important point certainly would be how the air cargo business interacts with media. Doesn't necessarily have to be specialist niche journalists as we are, but it could be nationally. Yeah. I was struck, not just the UK, but I was struck by the fact that during the pandemic, when there were national journalists or national stories, packages regarding PPE, for example, that a representative of IATA was not on the BBC, for example, or CNN or CNBC. I really do feel, and this actually points to recruitment, that the air cargo industry, the actors, need to make themselves more media savvy, more media friendly, and make themselves available.
Yep, good point. Good point. And number 2?
I think we have addressed sustainability, but I would like to go back to trucking and the road feeder service. And I believe that there needs to be not only a holistic approach to sustainability, but also joined up thinking in relation to, yes, you have an airline that is doing very well in terms of using sustainable aviation fuel, but then you have the road feeder service where you actually do have trucking and you have dirty fuel.
Yeah.
Why, again, we're back to accountability and responsibility. You can't have one aspect or several aspects of the supply chain that's green and then ignore the others that are not. I remember interviewing a particular logistic business who said, was happy to articulate that they actually had green trucks, as it were. And then when I asked, and do you have them in Africa, on the African continent? How do you? Oh no, we use their local trucks. So in terms of sustainability, as long as they were operating in certain countries, they were making progress. But once they went to, say, the African continent, in this case, no, just business as normal.
Okay, right. So thank you. And the third one?
I don't have a third one, actually.
I'll let you have a little think. So when the others come back, because we've got a little bet that we get 3 from everybody, so that when we put the notice board up, everybody will have 3. So I'll come back to you. All right, lovely. Alex?
I think my main one would be sustainability and be more ambitious, try harder, lead, look for investment from partners, work with your customers. There's a ton of stuff that can be done. And I think airlines are way behind where they should be. That's my first point.
Yep.
I think watch out for competitive threats from other industries. You can't just do what you've always done. You need to start thinking better. And the shipping lines will eat your business if you're not careful. E-commerce, you're going to need to, in fact, this prepares on to the next one, be prepared to rethink your business. Get in people from retail if that helps. Look at everything in a totally different way. And e-commerce is obviously going to be, I think, probably the last thing the airlines are left with after the shipping lines have taken everything else. So, sorry, they're a bit connected, but those are my 3 points, Chris.
All right, thank you very much. Will?
Consolidating and building on the gains of COVID and making sure that those lessons and the opportunity of the higher profile cargo has is followed through, so that air cargo gets representation at the highest level within the real decision-making bodies, especially the global level within ICAO, WCO, WTO, World Economic Forum, all the UN agencies. So the associations therefore really carrying on with that push to maintain air freight's representation there as an important voice. Fairer revenue sharing for cargo handlers and a kind of fairer deal for cargo handlers, including data sharing that they can get a hold of. But so I think the data is coming. The money perhaps isn't. And what would the last one be? I think, yeah, ongoing kind of career training and initiatives and continuing to be more proactive, and as Alex suggested earlier, having some greater diversity of voices going out there to point out the beauties and the excitement of the air logistics business.
Brilliant. Are you attending a GHA annual conference or something shortly, Will? Making yourself very popular there with them. Right.
Someone has to jump in that
man.
corner. And this is the air cargo handling.
It is, mate. It is. Well done. And Stan?
Well, no, Thelma, you want to go for number 3, or do you? I've got a.
Yes, number 3.
I could give you a hint this morning or yesterday. I forget anymore. Olivier said his number 3 was next time, Chris, make it only 2. So.
Well, I think for me, I have mentioned it before. I think certainly a more holistic approach, which in terms of discussions, there appears to be willing, but it's a question of actually acting now.
Yeah.
So I think I've written, and so have all Alex and Will, the time for discussion has ended now. It has to be followed up by action.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough.
Otherwise,
Very good.
it's another discussion. We'll be here next year having the same discussion about.
And there'll be more old people ready to hand over their experience, Alex, if we don't get it done quick enough. So fair play.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, brilliant.
Alex, you're on my, you're.
I'm off your Christmas
finished
card
with me
list, aren't
now.
I?
You're finished with me now.
Yeah, nice one.
You used to be my, my favorite lady in London, but but now it's over. Now that I've been classified as an old white guy.
Yeah. Right. OWG, down to you, son.
No, look, first of all, what the three of you said as my first wish. I mean, Alex, you brought up a terrific point, but I never see it in the Loadstar or Lloyds list or CAAS or aircargoeye. The very valid points. We're going to be taken to lunch if we don't get our act together, and in various ways you can get that out there, and so people can hear what you just said, other than the ones who are going to watch this. What I think, by the way, has been a terrific webinar throughout. I mean, every panel has been great. That's the first thing I would like to see, is that the media pick up on these things. For example, how digitization can save the environment, or low-hanging fruit can help the environment. That would be number one. Number two, Will, and you know it because we've talked about it in the past. I've always been pro GHA, and the reason I'm pro GHA, and sometimes, and I'm going to probably create some enemies. When you're owned by a private equity company, sometimes the problem is caused by the owners. But putting that aside, I think the GHAs and I think whatever happens on the ground with airports and GHAs is the future of our survivability and credibility for the beneficial cargo owners, the actual importers and exporters. So I think that my second thing would be that the airlines and the airports stop looking at GHAs as a income source for the developer to make money in the building on the airport, or the airline starts sending in their revenue management people to talk to GHAs rather than the marketing department and the CFO and the CEO. Because whatever happens on the ground is going to differentiate you from, not differentiate is a better word. It's going to either mean you survive or you don't survive. Because you have to remember, pre-COVID, some of these scheduled all cargo operators were on the verge of bankruptcy. All right. Now they got a windfall, but let's see what happens afterwards if we go back to some normalcy. So I think the second thing would be, I would love to see the industry take these GHAs and airports more seriously and support them as strategic partners rather than income sources or revenue sources. And I think the third thing, I would go back to what I said before in the very beginning, is digitization. I think digitization throughout is got so many benefits to it, but we've got to get your lobbying in the press and otherwise, not just to exporters, importers, or airlines or ground handlers. You got to get it out to the governments as well, and the financial papers even. So if you can get the word out that this is a business that has a lot of future if we do it right, and it can make an impact on the environment. I don't think it'll just be e-commerce we're flying, Alex. I think with global warming, we're going to be flying a lot of food in the future. And I can tell you right now, whether you like it or not, it's economically, it's an economic necessity for a lot of countries to export fresh food. And we can't forget about the fact that people need jobs and they deserve to have a life. So if you take away that possibility because you think that it's not sustainable to have it in your market because it's not nice, just think about the consequences for other continents and other people as well. And I think global warming is something that is more than just the pollution that an airplane pushes out. We've got to think about what the effects, economic migration of people away from continents. There's so many things to think about. So I think the third thing would be definitely that we look at the digitization and because these are shorter terms with longer implications, but these are things we can do now.
Yep. Well done.
What about you, Chris? What are your three things?
What are my three things? Okay, just being a little bit more philosophical or not. I think people should have a little bit more fun in what they do at work every day. I'm being serious. If you can't smile at what you're doing when you spend so much time doing the work that you're doing, it's wasted, because time is the most valuable asset any of us have ever got. And unfortunately, I lost my youngest brother just recently, and I never knew anybody who valued time as much as he did and what he could do. And to be able to be given a little bit extra time is so valuable. So I've got so much frustration and madness when I see people being negative, moaning, complaining, and unnecessarily being not human to other people. That to me goes beyond. And then being proud of what you do, you know, because it's so important, because you spend so much time of your life. And I don't know anybody who turns up at their retirement speech or whatever says, I hated what I did. I've got no pride in anything I did. And I don't even know why I did it. We all must have a good, more positive outlook and work together with people, no matter who they are, what they are, where they come from, or what they believe in, and just give everybody a fair chance. Now, that's nothing to do with the three things. Obviously, what I'd like to see as well is I'd like to see a much more open environment and platform to play from. And whether it's digitization, all the data sharing, people should be a lot more confident in sharing and making what we do together as an industry better. And if you can't play together as a team, then you don't get as much enjoyment out of winning. I think we've got to start now recreating the reasons why we came into this business. And most of us fell into it. We didn't sit in a classroom and say, I can't wait to get into cargo. And if you did, the teacher would probably look at you and think there was something wrong with you anyhow. But we all came into it for different reasons, but we've all had a most fantastic career and life out of it. And when you think that so many people have had the opportunity to work abroad and experience life on this little planet to such a degree, just because they did something around an aircraft landing or taking off, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing we've been given. And then I think just to have people being a little bit more wise as to what can go wrong sometimes, and not always be thinking and pushing for what's on a budget or a stretch budget. And now, thankfully, people are going to be a lot more risk averse. They're going to understand, you know, why you have to plan for worst case scenarios, because as sure as hell, there's going to be a lot of them coming up. And then just make people more confident in what they do. But anyhow, that's, like I said, that's not as important as what you guys said. But what's even more important is thank you all so much for a wonderful session. Really appreciated it. I think we had a few laughs anyhow, and that's what it's all about. So I really appreciate it. Good luck with what you do. And I think the point that Stan was saying is people like the three of you, if you can put certain messages in whatever article or whatever platform you've got, you know, just to make people start to think and listen and discuss, maybe even, wouldn't that be nice if people discussed about what they read or what they heard and debate and you know, have an opinion, but just to make it as interesting as possible, because there's so many things that people only talk about because they think it's trendy to talk about it, or it's what everybody else is talking about. And sometimes to stand out and be unique or be the first one to take that step forward is such a pivotal role in the way other people gain their confidence. So good luck to the three of you. Look forward to
we'll see you in Rome next year, eh?
Sorry?
And we'll see you in Rome next year.
Please God, touch wood and every other thing that we can do to make sure we're there. Yeah. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Stan.
Pleasure. Well done, guys.
It's really been a pleasure, and really, like Chris said, thanks a lot for participating today. And you are the messengers. People do listen to you. The power of the press is strong. Go for it.
Yeah. Right, guys, thanks very much. Salem will be turning the recording button off, and then if you can just hang on for a few minutes, and look forward to seeing you again soon.